We will start today by talking about the biomechanics of human skeletal articulations. We will talk about how to categorize the joints based on structure and movement capabilities. And during the discussion, I will be talking about what are the things that we can do as engineers to help in some of the challenges and medical problems faced. Then we'll talk about what are the functions of articular cartilage and fibrocartilage. This is one of our biggest orthopedic problems, which is cartilage. How to regenerate cartilage. Oh, we can't regenerate cartilage, but how can we keep the cartilage healthy? And how can we mimic its functionalities? And the last thing, which we are not going to be covering today, are the advantages and disadvantages of approaches to increase and maintain joint flexibility. I know a lot of you do stretching and flexibility, exercises to stay healthy. So we're going to keep this to another lecture, but we will talk about the first two. We would like to organize the joint based on structure and moving capabilities, explain the functions of articular cartilage and fibrocartilage, describe the material properties of articular connective tissue, and we're going to talk about this more a little bit, and explain the advantage of the increasing and maintaining joint flexibility. That's for another day. And describe the biomechanical contribution to common joint injuries and pathologies. That's also for another day. But we would like to understand these as well. We would like to know more about joints and go into details about what can we do as engineers to help that. I will start by this section, how to categorize joint based on structure and movement capabilities. We have different classifications of joints. So the first one is the Synarthrosis. That's what it's called. And those are immobile joints, and you can find them actually in the skull, and their job is to absorb shocks and permit little of movement. They're irregular in shape. They have grooved articulating bone sheet connected to fibers. Now, do you know why we have this grooving in the skull? Have you thought about why do we have this grooving in the skull? Why do we have this irregular shape? Securing the contact between the plates of the skull. And the other thing is that, we have our brain, we have a pressure inside the brain. If the skull is one piece, you will have so much pressure in the brain that's going to damage the brain cells. And remember, if anyone got into trauma or head injury, the problem is not at the moment when the injury takes place. The problem actually escalates afterward, because nerve cells immediately they start, reacting to the injury, but in different ways after the injury. When someone gets concussion, we need to observe them for a long period of time to make sure that they don't have problems in the brain. And that's all related to the pressure around inside the brain. So we cannot have solid intact skull. And I don't know if you have babies in your family, newborn babies, they have an opening, like an open hole in the head, because the skull, was open at the beginning and then it starts closing. Do you remember from last time when I told you we have two ways that bone heals? We have something called endochondral ossification and intramembranous ossification. The endochondral ossification is the ossification where you have a big bulk of cartilage forming around the fracture to stabilize it. We can't have that in the skull because we don't want to pressure the brain. So any damage to the skull will be healed using something called intramembranous ossification, not endochondral ossification, right? So that's something to keep in mind. So any fracture or damage to the skull, the way the bone is healing is used in a process called intramembranous ossification. And what happened is that we have on the surface of the bone, we have a thin layer of cells missing. It has a lot of stem cells, and those stem cells actually go to the fracture site and start healing. In long bone, it's a completely different story, because we need to stabilize the movement. That's why I need a big sphere to hold it, and that's called endochondral ossification. Skull intramembranous ossification. We go from stem cells immediately to osteoblast. They start putting bone. The other one, you have endochondral ossification. You have stem cells coming from the bone marrow. they become chondrocytes, they make cartilage, then osteoblast comes in and start building the bone inside it. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about joints, but you need to understand what happened with the bone in the skull and why that is the way that's structured. Another example of synarthrosis joints is actually the mid-radio ulnar joint, which is in the hand, right? We have something called syndesmosis joint, and that's a fibrous tissue binding the bones together, and it permits very limited movement. And that's another example of synarthrosis joints. Make sense? So the first one, synarthrosis, no movement, very limited movement for the joints. The second type of joint, amphiarthrosis, and this allow a little bit of movement. And if you look at the skeleton that we have there, see that in the ribs, the ends of the ribs, that is actually a joint. It's not bone, and that's very flexible actually, cartilage. So that's slightly mobile, and its function is to attenuate applied forces, and see that they are covering the heart, so that's soft. Any damage for these parts of the thoracic cage, it's not going to damage the heart itself if it breaks. And that's articulating bone are joined by a thin layer of, and the hyaline cartilage, it's a yellow cartilage actually, and it's very flexible, but strong. It's flexible but strong. And another example of these amphiarthrosis joints is something called the symphyses. Have discs of fibrocartilage separating the bones, and examples of the vertebral joints. The cartilage between them is that what we call the symphyses, and also pubic symphysis, which is the one that is at the bottom of the pelvis, and that's cartilage, and it gives very limited actually movement there. But it's very important, because without it, movement will be very, very, very painful, because the bone will be touching itself in the other bone, and then that's going to create problems. Our bone is a living tissue. It's filled with nerves and blood vessels. So any friction is going to be extremely, extremely painful. Now, we have something called diarthrosis or synovial, and those are the joints that we care about, right? Most of our movable parts of the body are of those joints. So we have something called articular cartilage, and protects layers of dense white connective tissue, protective layers of dense white connective tissue covering the articulating bone surfaces. And we're going to talk about the problems that the cartilage actually facing. Arthritis, that medical problem, is because of loss of cartilage or the damage of cartilage. And we have something, so we have the cartilage itself between the joints, but we have something called articular capsule. So all of these synovial joints, they have a capsule around it that is shielding it, characterized by synovial fluid. It's a clear, slight yellow liquid that provides lubrication inside the articular capsule, and we have the bursa, which is something that covers actually the joints, protect the joints, and it likes a capsule filled with synovial fluid that cushions the structures they separate. This is a schematic of the knee, and that's an example of synovial joint. And you can see that you have the bone, the femur and the tibia, right? And then you have this bursa, this part here, it's filled with liquids. And you have the synovial cavity and the articular capsule. See the white line here? See this line, this line, this line, these lines? Those are actually cartilage filled with liquids. It's like a capsule filled there. Now, I want you to imagine that the cartilage in any joint, like an onion, it's a lot of layers, and each layer has different water composition and different protein composition. And that's why it was so hard for us till now to be able to create artificial cartilage. It's really complicated. It's a very big challenge for us. The classification of joints, we care about the synovial, because those are the ones that we, the lower and upper extremities. And you as an engineer, you will be designing a total joint replacements. So total hip, total knee, gliding. Do you know which one is this is gliding, right? So that's represent the bones of the hand. Those are called gliding joint because they glide in all directions. And then you have the hinge, and the hinge is this joint, which is the elbow, right? It's like a hinge that you go inside that elbow. And then you have the pivot, and the pivot is this one here, which is anything that, like in the vertebrae, they pivot, in the sagittal plane, right? That's what they do, like this. And then you have the condyloid, and that is the one in the fingers here, tip of your fingers. That's condyloid. Those ones here, that's condyloid. And the saddle is the one that is this one here. So the thumb joint, the one that is attached to the hand, is called a saddle joint. And then you have ball and socket, which is your shoulder or the hip itself, ball and socket. Now, you as an engineer, we would like to, simplify the joint with these mechanical descriptions to be able to talk about the ranges of motion, because your ranges of motion, they are not in one of the three cardinal planes. They can come in an angle, right? So that's something you need to keep in mind. Your job as an engineer to understand the joint and then to try to design a joint replacement. We're going to be focusing on the cartilage because that's the biggest problem, that we are facing. What is articular cartilage? So the definition of it, it's a dense, white connective tissue, right? 1 to 5 millimeter in thickness, and that coats the ends of bone articulating at the synovial joints. What is it made of? We called it cartilage, right? Do you know what type of cells create cartilage or makes cartilage? There's a cell type called chondrocytes. Chondrocytes are the one that makes cartilage. And the thing is that, our DNA is double helix, right? You know the DNA? So this helix structure is something common in biology. But the cartilage, it's a connective tissue and has to be strong, correct? So it's triple helix. Think of cartilage as a piece of onion, or an onion. It has different layers, and each layer has different properties to work with. All right, soft, porous, and permeable tissue that is hydrated. There's a lot of water in the cartilage, and we need to make sure. And with time we lose the water, and that's how we lose actually some cartilage. So you need to be, careful about water intake to make sure that you are healthy. Your cartilage is healthy. Specialized cells called chondrocytes. Those are the cells that make cartilage, embedded in a mat. Remember I told you last time that cells do not live in space or liquid. They have to be in what? Extracellular matrix. And the extracellular matrix of the heart is different from the extracellular matrix of the cartilage. And it's different from the extracellular matrix of the bone. Stem cells. Do you know how they know? Do you know people tell you that stem cells can become any type of cell? How would they know? Stem cells, if they go to the heart, they sense the extracellular matrix and they immediately think, oh, we are in the heart. I have to become a heart cell. And so extracellular matrix is really, really important in deciding the fate of stem cells. Very important. And that's what we're going to be doing in the lab when you do tissue engineering, is that you will be creating an environment for the cells to think that they are actually in the heart or in the blood. Okay. Then little ability to heal. That's a big problem. The cartilage that we actually we're born with is going to stay with us all our life. It grows in size, but it's the same cartilage. It's different than bone. Bone. What is the thing that keeps the bone changing? The balance between osteoblast and osteoclast. One of them is the resorbing bone and one of the depositing bone. So that balance is what regenerates bone. That is not the case with cartilage. Cartilage is not regenerated. What are the functions of articular cartilage? It spreads the loads. So the cartilage, instead of having the bone on, the shape of the bone, we have indentation with the bone, right? Without this cartilage in the middle, you might crush the capsule of the bone. So it spreads the load around it, and it works as a lubricant for movement, so that we can continuously. So what is the main function of a lubricant? It's two things. You need to reduce friction and temperature, because temperature. Do you know what temperature does? So what is the problem with someone having high temperature? Why do you think it's lethal? The problem with temperature, and that we need to reduce it, is that because when we have high temperature, all our proteins degrade immediately. So your body internally, it actually starts degrading. And that's the problem, especially dangerous for young kids and infants. If they have high temperature, the damage is irreversible. So the proteins start degrading because of high temperature. But it's a protective mechanism. Do you know why the body increases temperature? To kill all the microbes. That is not from the body. But if it was excessive and it's not treated, then you are damaging your own tissue. This is a superior view. Do you remember what superior view means? What is superior? Which one? From top down, correct? So that's a top down view of the knee. And do you remember the ACL ligament? This is it. This is anterior cruciate ligament, and this is the one that gets all the injuries all the time. Around here on the top of this structure, we have a soft tissue meniscus. You remember do we have the meniscus? The lateral and we have lateral and medial meniscus, and those are actually collagen. Remember, multiple layers. It's very complicated how it's made. Intervene between the articular examples, the menisci of the bone. Possible functions of articulated fibrocartilage. Now, the cartilage itself is made by, it's a fiber, right? It's a triple helix fiber, and it's made by chondrocytes. Now, this is like a mesh of wires and fibers around it. But then we have also proteins that gets into it, that deposited by other cells to create that cartilage for us. And that's called the fibrocartilage. So it distributes load. We agree on that? Makes sense? It improves the fit, because bone is in an irregular shape. So it improves the fit, limits slipping and sliding of the bone. When people have dislocations, shoulder or knee or hip dislocation, that's because of the cartilage is not actually strong enough to hold it, or there is a very strong force that the subject was exposed to. And then we have protecting the joint periphery, retaining the joint lubrication, especially liquids, water, and absorbing shocks at the joints. So those are the things that the functions of articular cartilage, the articular cartilage. Okay. We have also connective tissue, articular connective tissue. Tendons are connecting muscles to bone, right? You know that. And we have ligaments that they are connecting bone to bone, right? So this is a picture of how the ligaments are connected. Now, these ligaments, they're white. So what does that mean? They don't have blood cells. They don't have blood vessels. No blood cells, which means they cannot regenerate. That's why when people have ACL tears, they have to do surgery, because that cannot heal like bone. Does it make sense? If the tissue is white, means that we don't have blood vessels. No blood vessels, no healing. That's it. We're done with that. And so ligaments connect bone to bone, right? So we're good with that. Any questions so far about what we covered?